The Emergency Zoo by Miriam Halamai. It is late August 1939. Britain is on the brink of war and preparations are underway to evacuate London's children to the countryside. When 12-year-old Tilly and her best friend Rosie find out that they will not be able to take their beloved dog and cat with them, and that, even worse, their pets will, along with countless other animals, be taken to the vet to be put down, they decide to act. The two girls come up with the idea of hiding them in their derelict hut in the woods, and when other children find out and start bringing their rabbits, guinea pigs and hamsters, their secret den turns into an emergency zoo. Inspired by real events during the Second World War, Miriam's novel is a touching tale of courage, resourcefulness and camaraderie in desperate times, as well as a stirring defence of animal welfare. Chapter 1. The Den. Saturday the 26th of August, 1939. "Hi there," called Tilly. Rosie waved back from the bridge over the canal. "Come on, Bonnie." Tilly turned her bike onto the towpath, her little dog trotting behind. Rosie was leaning over her bike basket, tucking a piece of pink flannel around her cat. "How's Tinkerbell this morning?" asked Tilly as she pedalled onto the bridge. "Fine and dandy," said Rosie, stroking along Tinkerbell's golden back. "Come on then, let's go." Bonnie gave a high-pitched bark and ran forward as Tilly pushed off and whizzed down the slope into the opposite bank. "Wait for me," called out Rosie, setting off at a wobble. They had to slow down anyway as they rode onto wasteland between the deserted factories. The ground was littered with broken glass and bits of metal which might puncture their tyres. But very soon they reached a gap in the broken-down wall, and then fields opened up. Tilly set off at a fast pace over the bumpy ground towards a wood in the distance, Rosie's short legs struggling to keep up behind. It only took a couple of minutes to reach the far end of the field. Then they had to push through brambles which tore at their skirts and scratched their bare arms, while Bonnie tunnelled through the undergrowth. Finally they were in a clearing. Tilly let out a great whoop of joy and dropping her bike on the grass. In front of them stood an old hut, about the size of two big garden sheds put together. It had crumbling walls, there were holes in the roof and the door was half off, but it was their very own secret den. They'd discovered it at the beginning of the holidays and had played there ever since. Rosie lifted Tinkerbell out of her basket and propped her bike against a tree. "You change the water in the jam jars," she said. "I'll pick some fresh flowers. Then we could sweep the floor so everything's nice and tidy before lunch," called Tilly over her shoulder as she and Bonnie raced into the den. Rosie wandered off, stroking Tinkerbell and looking around for flowers. "Poppies near the field, daisies in the grass," she murmured. "A couple of yellow irises and there's a big foxglove under the oak tree." Tilly couldn't help smile to herself as she dumped the old flowers in the clearing and emptied out the stale water. Rosie knew the names of all the flowers and all the trees and pretty much anything else. It was as though she swallowed books whole. On her bookshelf in her bedroom she had the 10 volumes of Arthur Mew's Encyclopedia, which she carefully consulted whenever Tilly wanted to know anything, as well as more books than anyone else Tilly knew. Now, as they were 12 and in high school, Tilly needed Rosie's books more than ever for the masses of homework. "That's what's so wonderful about the holidays," Tilly thought, stretching her long frame. "No homework for 6 whole weeks." "Come on, Bonnie," she called out. "Let's go down to the stream." Bonnie gave a delighted yap and raced off into the wood. The stream had almost dried up in the summer, but then the weather broke with terrible thunderstorms, so the water was running freely again between mossy banks. Bonnie arrived first and splashed straight into the middle, lapping up the cool, fresh water. Pond skaters with their tiny bodies and long, spidery legs skated across the surface of the pool, trapped between tree roots. A cheery blackbird was singing above them, almost drowning out the sound of Bonnie lapping away furiously. Tilly slipped off her sandals and socks, tucked her dress into her knickers and paddled in after Bonnie. The bed of the stream was muddy, and Tilly liked the squishy feeling between her toes. Rosie was scared that creatures might be hiding in the mud and bite her, so she would only sit on the bank and dangle her feet in the water. Once Tilly had filled the jam jars with fresh water, she climbed out of the stream, tucked her shoes and socks under her arm, and whistling to Bonnie, went back to the clearing barefoot. "Mind," warned Rosie as she stood at the door of the den, a broken broom in her hand. There's still nails around. Over the summer, they'd turned the den into their own little home, spending days tidying and organising. Tilly thought the old hut probably belonged to a farmer, but the place was so full of cobwebs it was obvious no one came there any more. They'd bashed down the worst cobwebs on the walls and laid a couple of sacks like rugs on the earth floor. There were a few wooden crates and they'd set these out as seats. With fresh jars of flowers and an odd bit of red velvet Tilly had begged from Mum, they'd made their very own cosy den. "We're so lucky no one else has found out yet," she said now, as she took packets of sandwiches from the bike basket. "That's because we know how to keep a secret," said Rosie, sitting with her legs curled under her and Tinkerbell in her arms. The cat was licking her front paws with long, slow strokes as Rosie fondled an ear. "I do love the way cats' ears go up in points like elves," she said. "Or Martians," said Tilly with a grin, as she flopped down in the long grass and pulled Bonnie onto her lap. "Our pets love the secret den as much as we do," she said, kissing the large white patch on Bonnie's forehead. Bonnie was a King Charles Spaniel, nearly 2 years old. Her fur was a mixture of black, white and gold. She had long curly ears and huge brown eyes which could melt the hardest heart. Rosie was holding out a whole sardine to Tinkerbell. A deep purring was coming from the cat as she delicately nosed the fish. "Where did you get that?" said Tilly. "Pinched it from the larder without Megan noticing," said Rosie with a mischievous grin. Tilly laughed and Tinkerbell opened her mouth and began taking small pieces of the sardine between her teeth. "She eats so much more politely than Bonnie." "Course," said Rosie. "Cats don't wolf food because they're tigers, really. Don't you think Tinkerbell looks like a small tiger?" She stroked the tabby cat's golden fur with its black stripes. "Terrifyingly so," mumbled Tilly through a mouthful of cheese and pickle sandwiches. The girls sat eating in the warm sunshine and Tilly fed Bonnie some dog biscuits. Then they lay down on their fronts to read their books. They lost all track of time as usual until Rosie said, "We have to go in 25 minutes or we'll be late for tea again." "All right," said Tilly with a sigh. She took her book over to her bicycle, calling Bonnie to follow. "It's Sunday school in the morning, and then Megan's invited the vicar and his wife for lunch," said Rosie. The girls rolled their eyes at each other. "Poor you," said Tilly. The vicar had a strange high-pitched voice and Tilly was always getting into trouble in Sunday school for dissolving into fits of giggles. "He says I'm incorrigible," she muttered. "Oh, yes," said Rosie. "Incorrigible, not able to be corrected or reformed." "Crikey, Rose, how on earth do you remember all of that?" "Sometimes I just read the dictionary, you know, for fun." Rosie bent down to kiss Tinkerbell's button nose, and the cat yawned and stretched herself. "I need some fun right now," said Tilly, throwing herself to her feet. "I'm going to get to the top branch of the oak tree." "Well, hurry up, we have to go very soon." Rosie picked up Tinkerbell and took her to the den, where she could let her run free and explore without getting lost. Tilly climbed into the lower branches of the tree and considered once more the branch above her head, which she hadn't quite reached all summer. "Today has to be the day," she told herself. "Mum keeps saying I've grown out of everything, so I must be taller than I was at the end of term." She gave one huge push upwards on her long legs, stretching her fingers until she thought they'd come out of their sockets. For the first time, she could feel the branch above her head, and reaching with both hands, she pulled herself up. I've done it," she called out in triumph, her face red with the effort. "Well done," Rosie called back from the den. "Now come down so we can get ready to go." "Coming!" And in a few seconds, Tilly swung down to the lowest branch and landed on the grass. Bonnie jumped up to lick her hand with delight. Tilly was the tallest girl in her class and the fastest runner. Rosie was a rather small person, 3 whole inches shorter than Tilly, with curly shoulder-length hair and tiny feet. She was top of everything at school, but Tilly was the daring one. Rosie worried about even the smallest things. Which isn't surprising, really, Tilly often reminded herself. Rosie lived with her married sister, Megan, and Megan's husband, Donald, who was a butcher. Rosie had lost her parents 3 years earlier when they both caught pneumonia one freezing cold January. Tilly had long ago decided Rosie was the bravest person she knew. She'd been weepy for the first few months, and then she'd buried herself in books and hardly talked about her mum and dad again. Megan, who was 25, was more like a very strict, frumpy parent than a big sister. She insisted on rules which drove Rosie mad, such as changing into slippers the minute she was inside the front door and wearing gloves to church. Fortunately, Donald, who was 10 years older than Megan, was funny and jolly and often slipped Rosie extra pocket money or sweets on the quiet. I know Megan's my sister, Rosie had told Tilly, and I'm lucky to have her, as she does say rather often, but really I'm an only child, like you. We're not just best friends, Tilly had declared. We're like sisters. I mean, we've known each other since babies and we have so much in common, like reading and our pets. Absolutely, Rosie had replied. Now Bonnie started to run off towards the woods again and Tilly chased after her, slipping on a lead for the last few minutes as they packed everything away and Rosie settled Tinkerbell in her basket. The little cat was looking sleepy after playing ball in the den. Come on, said Rosie in an anxious voice. Megan will shout at me if I'm late like yesterday. At least we have the ride home, said Tilly with a sigh, as they pushed through the thicket. Then they jumped on their bikes and rode back to their streets in West London, beyond the canal and their beautiful den. See you after lunch tomorrow, said Tilly as they parted on the corner. 2:30 sharp, called out Rosie as she pedalled away. Still another whole week of the holidays, thought Tilly as she rode slowly home, Bonnie lopping beside her, tongue lolling out of the side of her mouth.